I think inclusion is a big word. I think that you want to include people and ask them the best way for them to be able to continue to be involved. How can we incorporate your skills and your brain power? Everybody's got talents, and how can we use those talents? I see that in modern worship quite a bit, with just different people playing different roles, and I think it makes each and every one of those people feel important. And I think reaching out and asking people to do things gives them that feeling of belonging and the feeling of providing and the feeling of being a part of a wonderful church.
Hello, and welcome to More Than Sunday, a weekly podcast where we take a deeper dive into the stories, themes, and questions of our faith. My name is Eric Chakowski. I'm one of the worship directors here at First United Methodist Church Richardson, and with me every week is one of our associate pastors, Josh Fitzpatrick. Good morning to you, Josh.
Good morning, Eric. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, too. We are in the second week of Season 3 of More Than Sunday, and school is across the country. I think finally everybody's kind of back in school.
I think finally is the key word there. This was our first summer break, having a kindergartner on summer break. She's now in first grade, so for us to have to scramble from camp to camp, I was like, when is the school year going to begin? And it is finally here. We're finally finding our routine again. It's good to be back in school.
Yeah. Carson, our 4-year-old, started at the preschool here at the church last week, and the after-school care finally starts this week, and so we're finally, I think, settling into what our fall season is going to look like, because I feel like we've been sort of hitting a moving target as far as our day-to-day recently, so we're glad to be back in the groove.
The school year has begun. One of the cool things about the school year is it also brings these traditions that come on an annual basis. Obviously, football season, we had a great episode last week talking about football, but then just kind of the homecoming season in particular. Our guest this morning on the podcast has a message that she likes to share every homecoming season because it has to do with the topic of drinking and driving. Not only the impact it has had on her life, but also just this compelling message of how one decision can change the course of the rest of your life. So we are pleased and honored and privileged to have as our guest today, Debbie Smelko. Today we are joined by a wonderful person, Debbie Smelko, who is a research coordinator with the Richards Group. She is a longtime employee of Texas Instruments and a 40-year resident of Richardson. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the podcast, Debbie.
It is great to be here. I am so excited to be part of this. I feel very humbled to be a part of this.
It's great to have you, and also feel the need to mention that Debbie's a member of our church as well, and so we get to see her every Sunday morning, and it's a joy to have you just as a part of our church and to be able to experience your friendship and just your gifts in this church, so we're thrilled to have you here.
Front row left.
Yeah, that's right, every week.
Yeah, right there with the band.
Every week in the modern
right.
service, that's right.
The band is my pew family.
So we know you well, but those of us who don't know the famous Debbie Smelko, could you give us a little bit of your story and what brought you to our church in the first place?
Okay, I've been at this church for about 2.5 years now. I had been not attending a church, and both my friends, Joni Curry and Missy Griffey and several others, had been encouraging me to attend. And when they opened the modern worship building, that Sunday was the first Sunday I attended the church, and I've been coming just about every Sunday since. And I attend both modern worship and the traditional. I enjoy them both, and I'm in the Crosswalk Sunday school class.
Excellent. So for those of us listening on our podcast who may not know you in person, have the pleasure of knowing you, they won't be able to see your wheelchair, but we know that that is a significant part of your story. Would you mind telling us the story behind that?
I would be happy to tell you the story behind that. I have been in a wheelchair since September of 1978, and I had just graduated from Boston College and was about to go get my master's and was out on a Saturday night. And at the end of the night, I got in a car with somebody that was too drunk to drive, which I never should have done, but I was only 5 minutes from home, so I thought that it would be fine. I just wanted to get the night over with and get home, and unfortunately that didn't happen. He was too drunk to drive. He wouldn't give me the keys, and I got in the car, and we got hit, and I have a spinal cord injury. My spinal cord is severed, and I lost the use of my legs and spent the next 6 months in a hospital. So after spending 6 months in a hospital, I knew at some point I was going to have to get a job. So I had seen in the newspaper that they were doing some interviewing, and I thought I'd go check it out. I had the opportunity to talk to some folks from Texas Instruments. They invited me down. I was 22. It was an adventure. And I came down here and flew in and saw Flatlands. And coming from a city that was built in the 1600s to a city that was built in basically the 1960s. And of course, all this is prior to any ADA being implemented anywhere. I thought this would be a good opportunity to see if I could be independent. I knew that my mom would mother me as a 22-year-old, that she wouldn't let me be as independent as I wanted to be, so I came on, knowing that if it didn't work out, I could move myself back home, and that was 41 years ago. And I'm still here, and that's basically the wheelchair part of the story, and there's a lot of life that went on after that.
For sure, and we'd love to hear much more about the life that went on after that as well. I want to thank you for just sharing that story briefly. I think it's easy a lot of times for us to think that things like that won't happen to us or that we're only 5 minutes from home. But what would you say to someone who may not think it's a big deal after a few drinks to drive or to get in the car with somebody who's been drinking?
Well, in 1978, there was no Uber. There were no cell phones. So it was a lot harder to come up with an alternative because nobody wants to call their parents at 2 in the morning, but you should call your parents at 2 in the morning or call a friend or call somebody because nowadays you've got a cell phone, you've got Uber. There is absolutely no excuse for anybody to get in a car with somebody that has had too much to drink or has their system impaired. They're too tired to drive. They've been doing drugs, anything, any reason that they shouldn't be behind a wheel. There's no reason that you should get in there with them. Or if you're the person that's drinking, you should leave your car where it is and take an Uber home.
Now, this is obviously a message that is a significant part of your life, but it's also a message that you've been able to share with others. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with the schools and sharing your story in that context?
Yes, especially when my kids were in school, I would go up to the schools prior to homecoming during the month of September. I would go up and I would tell my story. I would tell the kids that, I can't just, go to the beach and run into the ocean, which is one of my favorite things to do anymore, because I made a decision to get in a car with somebody that was too drunk to drive. And I would have open, frank discussions with these 9th, 10th, 11th graders and tell them, the consequences, because sometimes teenagers aren't really thinking about tomorrow. They're thinking about the fun they're having now. And
Sure.
I want them to realize that this was a decision that I made that still affects me all these years later. And there's a lot of things that I would like to do that I can no longer do. But there are a lot of things I do too.
Well, and as we mentioned, that's not the end of the story, and there was a lot of life lived after that. You went on to be a champion for people with disabilities in the workplace and in so many other places. Would you continue to tell us a little bit about your time at Texas Instruments, not only with your work there, but all you did for people with disabilities at TI?
Okay, so when I started at TI in 1979, there was no Americans with Disabilities Act. That came in 92. But I would go to TI and we'd talk about, places I couldn't get in the building. And they were always more than willing to improve accessibility. When I first got there, there was just one bathroom that I could use that I shared with 2 gentlemen that were both in wheelchairs. And, quickly we fixed that to make accessible restrooms within the women's restroom. The activity center, there were steps to get up there, and they built a ramp. And so I was able to go there and not only work out, but I could go out there and watch softball games, which is where I met my husband. And then when American with Disabilities Act came around, it was obvious that I should be on the committee to help them implement what we hadn't implemented. And even to this day, when you look through what's written down about what makes something more accessible, it doesn't always make sense. And sometimes just walking or rolling in my wheels or, seeing how things could be better, it makes it better for everybody. When they built the IMAX downtown, I went down there and, it was accessible. I could roll in and I could sit next to the chair. But if you've been to the IMAX, part of the experience is going back in the chair. And it was really simple for them to go add the chairs with the lift-up armrest so I could transfer into the IMAX chair and be able to experience that. And so not only did I have that experience, but others have had that experience because they were able to go and do that too. And they're building the new stadium in Arlington. And, I've written to them. I haven't heard back from them, but I've written to them and asked them to make sure that they do a better job in putting the accessible seating in. Because when they built what was new in 96, which was after the Americans with Disabilities Act, they put the seating all at the top. But it didn't matter because when the people below me stand up, I can't see. When they're sitting down, everything's great. But when people stand up, you can't see. So hopefully they improve that when they build this new stadium.
1992, the American with Disabilities Act was passed. What did that include? What major changes took place at that point?
Well, then all of a sudden it became the law. Now people have to make, if they make any significant changes to a building, they have to make things accessible at the same time.
Okay.
And so that's made a city that was fairly well accessible even more accessible. It doesn't apply to people's private homes, obviously, but it applies to new construction or
public places
or reconstruction.
So I'm kind of curious along those lines. As somebody who's in a wheelchair, you have a different lens on life. So as you just described with the new baseball stadium, are there other places that we'd go just on a daily basis that maybe were designed by people without a disability that you're able to look and say, hey, this isn't quite right? What are some other common things that we would overlook?
Bathrooms.
Okay.
Sometimes they'll go make a bathroom door bigger, but they'll make it open in. And so when you go in, you can't close the door. So, I could get in there, but now I can't close the door. So that's a quick fix. And I can't tell you how many restaurants I've gone out and found the manager and said, hey, if you flip the door around, change the hinges, that makes this room really accessible.
Right.
The way it is now, I can get in there, I can use the restroom, but I can't close the door. That's a very common one that I've done several times.
It's amazing to me in hearing, huge international companies like TI and IMAX and these other things, and hopefully the new Texas Rangers baseball stadium, that you have had opportunities to influence in positive ways, the ways that their spaces are designed to make sure that they're accessible to everyone, and that you were just on the front edge of, like I said, TI's push towards, even prior to the law passed in 92, and then subsequently afterwards, all of the work that they were doing to implement the accessibility in that facility. I think that's an amazing thing. Yep. You've also been a trailblazer in the world of parenting. You've got kids. Would you mind sharing with us a little bit of the challenges that being in a wheelchair posed for parenting, and then maybe how you've been able to encourage other parents?
Sure. I have 3 children. They're very grown now. My baby just turned 27, and my older 2 are 33 and 31, because this is September. And when I was pregnant with my oldest, I went to my obstetrician and, I said, well, is there somebody else I can talk to that's been through this, been through the pregnancy, had babies, because I was scared. I hold somebody else's baby and, he doesn't know what to do. It's like, it's going to fall, and there really wasn't anybody. We found one person that had children, but she didn't have custody because she was a recovering alcoholic that only drank a little. And that wasn't going to be a really good example. So, I really wanted to, again, trailblaze for other people in wheelchairs. And so after I had my children, I became the, come to my house, come see. It's the environment, it's just like any animal, you adapt to your environment. And when I held my children on my lap, they didn't fall off because they learned at a young age how to adjust and how to lay there or how to sit there. But if I held somebody else's 3-month-old, they go plop on the floor. And so I wanted people that were about to have a baby to have this experience of holding my child and seeing that it's going to be okay. They will adapt to you. Don't be scared. Don't be worried. There weren't changing tables for somebody in a wheelchair. And, so we adapted, with cubes and a piece of plywood, and so I could roll under. And, we showed them that. And, it's just, it made me feel good to be able to help other mothers not have the concerns that I went through prior to having my first child.
So you became the mentor that you didn't have.
Exactly.
And how did you connect with these other mothers who
Through
were
the obstetrician, because he had a practice. And then plus the other doctors at the hospitals got to know, the lady in the wheelchair that had the baby and, all that other stuff.
And so if they saw another mother in a wheelchair, they would send them to the experts.
Or they'd call me and say, do you mind talking to this person? Yeah. And of course I did. And, back then, even getting the child in and out of the car seat. Now, car seats today, I'm a little worried about when I have grandchildren because they're so much bigger and so much more. You all probably have trouble getting those kids in.
That's right. We had a hard enough time. Someone just helped me yesterday. I was trying to bend my kid in half to try to get in the car seat.
And so those are the concerns I'm starting to have now. Yeah. But somehow it will work out, and
then you'll become the expert at that.
That's exactly right.
Oh wow. So now one of your 3 children also has a disability. Do you mind telling us a little bit about TJ and his disability?
Yes, my oldest child has mild cerebral palsy, and he is deaf. He has 2 cochlear implants. We believe it's due to my accident. We think that when the stick shift hit my back in the car accident, that my liver was stressed. And then when I was pregnant with TJ, my liver ruptured, and TJ was born at 31 weeks. They didn't know whether he would survive or whether I would survive, and we both survived. Unfortunately, some of the medicine that saved his life also took away his hearing. But he has persevered. He's now 33, and he is kind of like me in the fact that he mentors other deaf people. He's part of a cochlear awareness team, and he helps mentor others that have these disabilities. But it wasn't easy for TJ going through school and not being, on the football team and not doing all those other things. And so although he's persevered, it's still a tough road for him. He struggles with friendships. He struggles with, having people his age that he socializes with. So we have found that FUMCR has been a very positive place for him to be. And he really enjoys the modern worship on Sunday mornings. And again, the welcoming there has been great for him. So thank you for that.
Well, it must be such a blessing for him to have a mom who is already a mentor and encourager for so many people and who has had an experience of living with disability in your story. And I know that that's got to be a huge blessing for him all along the way as well.
Oh, thanks. But I'm hoping that being here will also help him blossom.
Well, I know I'm already blossoming. Having known TJ for just even the short time I've known him, I'm learning a lot from TJ on a weekly basis. And so
I appreciate the fact that you've agreed to mic up for him so that he gets exactly what you're saying into his...
Right. So TJ's cochlear implants have a transmitter that can send the signal straight to his implants, which go straight to his brain.
Uh-huh.
And so that's so cool that we have the technology to be able to do that here in our Worship and Arts Center.
Well, not all churches have been willing to do what you've done, so thank you.
Well, it's completely our pleasure. So one of the things that always amazes me, and I think that has immediately glued you to anybody who has met you, is your sense of positivity. And I think it's also become part of a mission of your life, is remaining positive despite the circumstances. What is the key to that positivity?
Well, when I was in the car accident, they brought me into the emergency room and then into ICU. And when I was in ICU, they brought in another young lady that was 18 years old, but she had no identification. She had been hit by a trolley, and she had a brain injury. And she was girl in bed B for, 3 or 4 days, maybe a week. I don't even remember exactly how long. When she left the hospital, she left with the brain capacity of a 5-year-old. And I always felt blessed that I didn't have any brain injuries and that I still had my mind and I could still function and I could still drive and I could still do all these things. That how could I be bummed out about that? I still had a life. And, when I was in the hospital, I'm a big people person, which you guys know. I'm always like to talk to people and see people, and I wanted people to come visit me and spend time with me because I didn't want to be alone in that room. And I felt like if I was bummed out or negative or whatever, they weren't going to come. And I wanted people to come and sit there with me and be there with me because it was 6 months is a long time.
Now, I heard a rumor about something about a prescription for beer.
Yeah.
Can you share that?
Maybe.
I don't know if we should say this on the podcast, but it makes for a great story.
Yeah, well, it was one of the things that they had the doctor did prescribe a Michelob every night on my tray for me.
That is hilarious. Wow. And so they put a Michelob on your tray and delivered it to your room.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I don't think we'd probably see in a hospital today. Debbie, you've obviously given a lot of advice to people in the disability community, as we've discussed, and just been an encourager for folks. What's some advice that you would give to businesses, churches, organizations today when it comes to making the world more accessible to all people, including those in wheelchairs?
I think inclusion is a big word. I think that you want to include people and ask them the best way for them to be able to continue to be involved. How can we incorporate your skills and your brain power? Everybody's got talents. And how can we use those talents? I see that in modern worship quite a bit with just different people playing different roles. And I think it makes each and every one of those people feel important. And I think reaching out and asking people to do things gives them that feeling of belonging and the feeling of providing and the feeling of being a part of a wonderful church.
So along the lines of accessibility, when we talk about a worship service, I'm sometimes aware that we use language that isn't accessible to all people. And so we say things like, would you please stand? Would you mind commenting on that from your perspective?
Okay, from my perspective, Eric always says, stand as you are able. And it is the first person that I've ever had do that. And it was just like, oh, he's including me.
So even just saying as you are able.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Just that little piece has always made Oh, I wonder if he means that for me.
For you and for others.
There's others that can't stand, that you don't know why they can't stand. Right. You don't see that. They've come in and, you may not see their walker, or you may not see other things. Just having that spot where I like to be, and having, being able to do that and allowing me to serve communion. That's huge. Cool. To be able to be included in that, to be able to have a role and do all that. So, yes.
Oh, that's great.
On my best days, when I'm aware of it, I even try to sometimes use the term rise as you're able. I had a mentor of mine back a long time ago when I was cantering in a Catholic church, and that was the language he used to use. And he said, sometimes the word rise might give people an opportunity to rise in spirit or rise in posture. Oh. And whether it's for reasons of disability or for reasons of emotional distress or other reasons that, as you said, we may not know why.
Holding a baby, maybe.
Literally, right? Yeah. There's all kinds of reasons that people might not be able to stand. And so I credit just a great mentor in that awareness and language. But
in 40 years, it's the first time I ever heard it.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Well,
it's the old stand up if you agree with something or doing all that. I'm always, hi.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I know there's a lot of places that I'm personally falling short, but I'm glad to hear that.
Oh, you don't. You're great.
That's an error. Well, thank you. That's very kind.
In 1994, you won the Against All Odds Award from the American Paralysis Association, which is now known as the Christopher Reeve Foundation. You were the first woman to receive this award, right?
I was.
What did that feel like? What did it feel like to be honored in that way?
Have you ever been to Tavern on the Green?
No.
It's in New York. No. It's pretty.
I remember driving past it on a tour, and they said that's the famous Tavern on the Green.
It is. You were there. It's spectacular. It's just a really cool place. And Ben Vereen presented me the award. And it made me feel like not only was I being honored, but I was also being an example to other women and other women with disabilities that you could achieve things. And that, these are the things that I did. But I'm not saying pat me on the back. I'm saying you can do this too. I'm not doing this podcast so that everybody can say, oh, she's great. I'm doing this podcast so that other people can be inspired, understanding that no matter what your abilities are, you've got some God-given talents that everybody can use. It was kind of a whirlwind in 94. I was on the Today Show. I was in numerous magazines. There was a big article in the Dallas Morning News. But all that wasn't for me to get a pat on the back. All of that was for me to be an example to other people that they can do this too. I'm nothing different than they are.
Well, you are clearly such a great example to many, many people, and your wisdom and passion for life is just really inspiring for us. So thank you for sharing those stories. We have one question that we ask every guest that comes on the podcast, and that question is this. At this point in your life, what is one thing that you wish someone would have told you?
Don't get in the car. Don't do it. After that I'm still able to live a full life, that it didn't all end on that night. I've got 3 wonderful children. I had a wonderful 20-year career at TI. I'm working on a wonderful 20-year career at the Richards Group. I'm 13 years in. I'm hoping to make 20. And you just got to keep plugging because there's a lot of life left to give. So you don't give up. You keep going because there's so much joy out there that you still can live. And, if you sit back and don't try and let yourself be reclusive, then you're going to miss it. You're going to miss all of it.
Awesome. Thank you again for being so vulnerable today and for sharing your story with us. Just so powerful to hear not only the beginning of the story, but the rest of the story. And I know Eric and I are both leaving better than when we walked in, having heard this story. So really, just thank you for being here today.
I am humbled to be here, and I'm glad that you're going to be able to tell my story.
It was such a joy to sit in a room and listen to Debbie share her story and give her wisdom around the impact that drunk driving has on people's lives. Upon hearing that we had Drew Pearson in the first episode of this season, she followed up with an email to Josh and I about a really incredible connection she has to Drew, and we wanted to share that email with you. It reads, "Tonight I was reminded of my connection to Drew Pearson. When I was 31 weeks pregnant with TJ, my liver ruptured. The doctor that packed my liver back together and saved my life told me I was the second most famous person with a ruptured liver that he had operated on. Apparently, Drew Pearson had the same injury from the car accident that killed his brother. Dr. Borland was the doctor that saved both of our lives, Drew in 1984 and mine in 1986. When your liver ruptures, it's a life-threatening occurrence, and you can literally bleed to death. When the OB saw that TJ, her son, was in distress, he did an emergency C-section and realized he was drowning in blood. Fortunately, Dr. Borland was there to take over and save my life. When the OB left the OR, he told Tom that he was not sure if I would survive such an injury to my liver. Now, 33 years later, my podcast episode and Drew Pearson's podcast episode will be back-to-back weeks.
For more information on Debbie's story, including pictures of her life prior to the accident, some video footage that was shot in interviews afterward, and also the Facebook post that she shares every September 17th, we'd encourage you to visit our webpage at fumcr.com/morethansunday. Also, during this homecoming season, we would encourage you to share this episode with anybody who you think might need to hear this message and this story of the impact that drinking and driving can have on the rest of somebody's life.
Whether you're a high school student or a parent or in a different demographic, this story is important for all of us to know, for all of us to hear, and to hear Debbie's reminder ringing in our ears that one decision can change your life forever. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of More Than Sunday. If you like the podcast, please feel free to share it, go online and leave a comment, or give us a rating so that others might hear about us. We've got a new episode coming out every Wednesday, so make sure you also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss our next episode. If you want to find out more about First United Methodist Church Richardson, you can find us online at fumcr.com, as well as on Facebook and Instagram. Special thanks to Debbie Smelko for joining us this week, and make sure you tune in next Wednesday when we have a conversation with Dr. Jeannie Stone, the superintendent of RISD schools. Have a great week.